The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted with shades of fading gold and crimson. The evening air carried the crisp bite of an early Montana winter, and the lonely ranch of Elijah Carter stood like a stubborn outpost against the rolling fields and distant hills. Elijah, a man hardened by years of work and silence, leaned against the wooden fence as he waited for the stagecoach that was rumored to be arriving that very night. His heart pounded beneath his wool coat, though his face betrayed little emotion. He had grown accustomed to loneliness, to the hollow echo of boots across his porch and the groan of the cabin settling in the night. But tonight was different. Tonight, someone was coming. Elijah had written letters for months, pouring into them the parts of his soul he rarely admitted aloud. He told of his ranch, his herd, his land that stretched wide but felt unbearably empty. He confessed his longing for a companion, for laughter to break the silence of his evenings. The reply came from a woman named Helena, a woman who lived oceans away in Norway, where the mountains rose like giants and the winters tested a person's strength. She had written boldly, her penmanship steady, and her words filled with certainty. She claimed she was not delicate, not fragile, but strong. She had lived among men who worked in forests and on ships, and she promised she could manage any hardship the American frontier could throw her way. What Helena had not described in detail was her size. When the stagecoach finally rattled into town, the townsfolk gathered as they always did, curious for news, parcels, or fresh gossip. Elijah stood on the edge of the dirt street, his hat clutched in his hands. The door of the coach opened, and a hush fell over the crowd. First a boot emerged, then another. They were broad, heavy, and planted firmly in the dust. A skirt followed, and then she stepped out, towering over the others, her shoulders wide, her golden hair braided in thick ropes that hung past her back. She straightened to her full height, and Elijah realized she was nearly a head taller than him. The murmurs began immediately. "Good Lord," someone whispered. "She'll split him in half," another chuckled. Elijah ignored them. He looked at her, and though his throat was dry, he forced himself to speak. "Miss Helena?" Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, settled on him. "You are Mr. Carter?" she asked, her accent rich, her voice carrying easily above the whispers. "Yes, ma'am," he swallowed. "That's me." Helena smiled, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. "Then I am yours, if you'll have me." The townsfolk snickered behind their hands, but Elijah didn't care. He tipped his hat and reached for her trunk, though he nearly staggered under its weight. Helena noticed, and with one hand lifted it as if it were nothing. The onlookers gasped, but Elijah only nodded. Strangely comforted by her strength, they rode together to his ranch, where the setting sun cast long shadows across the land. The cabin was humble, a single main room with a stone fireplace, a narrow table, and a bed that creaked with age. Helena ducked as she entered, brushing her head against the low rafters. She looked around, her gaze sharp and assessing. Finally, she set her trunk down and stood in the center of the room. "It's too small," she said plainly. Then her eyes softened as they settled on Elijah. "But I'll endure tonight." Elijah felt heat rise to his cheeks. He wasn't sure if she spoke of the house, the bed, or of him. He cleared his throat and busied himself with lighting the fire. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, but inside, the flames cast a warm glow on the walls. Helena sat in the chair by the fire, her broad shoulders filling its frame, and Elijah stole glances at her. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, her hands calloused, her arms powerful, yet her smile carried a gentleness that unsettled him in the best of ways. "You live here alone, long time?" Helena asked, her accent thick, but her words careful. "Too long," Elijah admitted, staring into the flames. She studied him for a moment before replying, "Then maybe you not mind if I take more space?" The words made him chuckle nervously, and she laughed too, the sound deep and warm. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel so empty. The days that followed brought challenges and surprises. Helena adjusted quickly, though the house seemed to shrink around her presence. She had to duck through doorways, stoop at the wash basin, and fold herself onto a bed too short for her legs. But she never complained. Instead, she worked alongside Elijah, mending fences, hauling water, and tending to the cattle. She carried buckets 2 at a time where he could only manage 1. She swung an axe with such precision that the logs split cleanly with each strike. At first, Elijah felt humbled, almost diminished by her strength. But slowly, he realized he was not being replaced. He was being supported. Where his hands faltered, hers steadied. Where his back ached, hers carried the load. Together, they accomplished more than he had ever done alone. The neighbors, however, were less kind. Some whispered cruel jokes in town, calling her a giantess, a circus act, or worse. Elijah heard them, but when he looked at Helena, he found no shame in her size. He found admiration. She stood tall, not just in body, but in spirit, meeting every insult with silence, every sideways glance with dignity. One evening, as the snow began to fall in thick flakes outside, Elijah built up the fire while Helena prepared supper. The table looked almost comical with her seated at it, her frame dwarfing the wooden furniture. As they ate, the wind howled and the storm thickened, trapping them inside. Later, as they sat close to the fire, Elijah finally found the courage to speak. "Helena," he began, his voice low, "you've changed this place already. I don't rightly know how I managed before you came." She turned to him, her expression softening. "Maybe you didn't manage. Maybe you only survived." He nodded, realizing how true her words were. For years he had existed, but never truly lived. Now, with her here, even the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was full of unspoken warmth. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Helena stretched out on the narrow bed. Her legs dangled past the edge, her shoulders spilling over the sides. She sighed, then looked at Elijah with a half-smile. "Perhaps it is too small," she whispered. "But with you, it feels enough." Elijah lay beside her, his heart thundering. He had always imagined needing to be strong, needing to protect. But as he drifted to sleep with her beside him, he realized that strength could be shared, and love was not about fitting into expectations, but about making space for one another, no matter the size. The winter was harsh, but together they endured. Elena's presence brought life to the ranch. She sang old songs in her native tongue as she worked, her voice echoing across the snowfields. She taught Elijah new ways to mend harnesses, to stack wood, to make bread that lasted longer in the cold. And in turn, Elijah showed her the rhythms of the land, the patience of cattle, the quiet beauty of a Montana sunrise. As months passed, the gossip in town faded. The whispers turned into grudging respect. Folks saw how the Carter Ranch thrived, how Elijah seemed stronger, happier, fuller than before. And though Helena never sought their approval, she earned it through her sheer resilience. By spring, the ranch was transformed. Elijah had built a larger bed, stronger chairs, and even raised the door frames to make Helena more comfortable. She teased him for it, but he saw the gratitude in her eyes. They worked side by side, and when the day ended, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky bloom with stars. One evening, as fireflies danced in the grass and the air carried the sweet scent of earth awakening, Helena leaned against him. "You think still, house too small?" she asked, a playful note in her voice. Elijah shook his head. "Not anymore. Not since you filled it." Her hand, warm and strong, found his. And in that moment, Elijah knew that the cabin, the ranch, even his life had never been too small. It had only been waiting for someone big enough to share it. Their love was not the kind sung about in ballads or whispered in saloons. It was quiet, steady, built with calloused hands and patient hearts. But it was real, and it endured, just as Helena had promised that first night. For Elijah Carter, the lonely rancher, the words she spoke, "It's too small, but I'll endure tonight," were no longer a limitation. They were a vow, and together they proved that love could stretch beyond walls, beyond expectations, and beyond the very horizon of the Montana plains.